In 1994, Jim Carrey graced the big screen with not one, not two, but three massive box office successes, which raked in a combined total of about $700 million worldwide, seemingly transforming him into a pop culture sensation overnight.
He continues to be the comedy meteor of the moment, Jim Carrey.
Can I thank everybody?
One more thing, I'm pleased to announce that the American people, laughing all the way to your bank, have also voted you their favorite comedy actor on video and their favorite male newcomer on video. Congratulations, Jim. You're the first blockbuster triple winner. Oh, my God.
But Jim's rise to the top of comedy wasn't that simple. And once he got there, his life was sent into a whirlwind by celebrity gossip tabloids and paparazzi who relentlessly invaded his privacy.
The question on everyone's mind at the premiere of The Cable Guy was whether Jim would show up with Lauren Holly and whether their on-again, off-again relationship was on again.
In today's episode, we'll be looking back on the making and aftermath of all three Jim Carrey films from 1994. Starting off with Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Now, there's a new way to spell hero.
Don't kill me.
Jim Carrey is Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Rated PG-13. Sneak preview Saturday, January 29th.
When you watch Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, whether or not you enjoy the movie, this is one of those roles where you really can't imagine anyone else playing the character.
Would you like an ashtray?
I don't smoke. It's a disgusting habit.
But it turns out that actually several actors and even one actress were once considered for this movie long before Jim Carrey involved himself with it, including Rick Moranis, Judd Nelson, Alan Rickman, and Whoopi Goldberg, who would have played a character named Alice Ventura. David Alan Grier has mistakenly recalled being offered a role in the movie several times before, but has since corrected himself by stating he was actually offered a co-starring role in a bizarro version of Dumb and Dumber that would have paired him up with Rob Schneider, but we'll get back to that later on in the video. The starting point of Ace goes back to the late 80s, when writer Jack Bernstein envisioned sort of a comedic Sherlock Holmes type character. But after he saw a, at the time, news segment on David Letterman called Stupid Pet Tricks, this idea transformed into a comedic pet detective by the name of Ace Ventura.
Meet Ace Ventura. He's our pet detective.
Came very highly recommended by Martha Metz.
Martha Metz. Oh yeah, the bitch.
Unfortunately, the original script for Ace has never been posted online. However, in a 1994 interview, Howard Stern, who I guess laid eyes on it at some point, referred to the original script as
the worst script ever written on the planet Earth, or any other planet for that matter.
But about 2 years after their formation, Morgan Creek Entertainment cashed in on this screenplay with expectations of a big, broad comedy. And with a recent string of box office flops, they needed a comedic powerhouse who would just completely let loose and hopefully land a performance to this movie that would bring in boffo box office dollars for the studio. After building the foundations of his career through stand-up comedy, Jim Carrey eventually appeared in a TV series and a few movies throughout the 1980s that really didn't take advantage of his over-the-top comedic style.
I can say it.
You can say no.
Yes.
You can say no.
Yes.
So you'll tell them both no.
Maybe.
As a result, Hollywood slapped him across the forehead with a metaphorical stamp of rejection. Kicked to the curb working as an impressionist in Las Vegas, a gig he was really good at but absolutely hated, Damon Wayans recognized that Jim had the potential to be an absolute superstar. So when his brother's new sketch comedy series In Living Color was looking for talent, he brought Jim in for an audition. Keenan Ivory Wayans was blown away and just knew right then and there that this is the guy they wanted on the show.
This is a real knife.
Don't worry about it, grasshopper. It's okay, come on!
Oh my God, I'm really sorry.
Like a lot of beginning students, you attacked me wrong.
During his time on In Living Color, Morgan Creek CEO James G. Robinson took notice of Jim Carrey and spent about 2 years actively pursuing him for the role of Ace Ventura. But Jim later admitted that he hated the original script. It was horrifying. So the studio finally caved and offered Jim Carrey what they referred to as a no-lose situation, saying to him, "You can rewrite it. When you finish rewriting it, if you don't want to do it, you still don't have to." Jim agreed to this proposal and quickly enlisted the help of joke writer and fledgling director Tom Shadyac. After keeping past comedic performances pretty contained on the big screen, Carrey said to Tom, "I've always paid attention to the acting lessons, and the less is more stuff, but I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being safe." Tom told him, "For Ace Ventura, I want to let you go. I want to let you do what you do on stage."
Excuse me, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
After plugging away at the script and writing a movie so completely tailor-made for Jim that he couldn't possibly let anyone else do it, Tom pitched both the rewrite and himself as a potential director to Morgan Creek. And he received the green light on both fronts despite the fact that he had only directed a TV movie called Frankenstein: The College Years.
Right? Have you seen that film?
Yes, I have.
Right,
yeah.
so you were probably nervous about...
Frankenstein, the college years?
Right, so you must have been nervous even about him directing.
I was terrified, frankly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ace Ventura: Pet Detective is one of those movies that just smacks you in the face with chaotic energy as soon as the studio logos fade away. It opens up with a segment that I'm sure is included in every UPS training video to this very day, in which Ace, disguised as a delivery man, rescues a mistreated Shih Tzu from the dude who helped Ernest P. Worrell escape from jail.
Sounds broken.
Most likely, sir. I'll bet it was something nice, though.
Shipping on your schedule. What could Brown do for you?
Pretty quickly, the audience understands that Ace Ventura is the film's sole funny guy, with absolutely everyone else acting as the straight man.
If I'm not back in 5 minutes, just wait longer.
That's mostly because of the fact that Jim Carrey dialed his performance up to 11, and there wasn't any room in the movie for another even slightly humorous character. Like, this dude somehow seemed more wild and out of control than every single one of his animal companions. And their inclusion kind of saves Ace from coming across as one of the most unlikable dickheads of all time. Because, let's be real, as funny as Jim Carrey played this character and as many incredible one-liners as he spouts off,
yes, Satan?
If you came across this guy in real life, he would just be absolutely insufferable to be around.
Alrighty then.
But he's an animal lover, and animals have proven time and time again that they're better than humans, so he gets a pass.
We feed your dog.
Dog food. Why?
He is miserable.
The character's love for animals also seems to have influenced the way that Jim Carrey played him, because everything from his hair to the way he walks and moves around was actually inspired by a very specific animal.
I based Ace Ventura off of a smart bird, a cockatiel or a parakeet of some kind. The clothing I picked was all, you know, like a colorful bird, tropical bird. The walk was a bird, like but when I spoke, it would be like, you know, like birds do this, you know, and that's right. Everything is with a little peck and a little, you know, that kind of thing. Everything was based on a bird, even the hairstyle.
As confident as Jim Carrey comes across in this performance, while shooting the movie, he wasn't sure what the audience reception would be. To him, Ace Ventura was either going to ruin his career, because as he later stated, if you go out that far and it doesn't work, you're in a lot of trouble. You don't get a second chance. Or the movie would explode and be very popular, which he saw as the less likely scenario. Cinematographer Julio Macat later admitted that while he found Jim Carrey hilarious on set, the stuff he was doing on camera was so over the top that he wasn't so optimistic about just how well it would play out on the big screen. Further elaborating those feelings by saying, "I truly thought this was going to be the biggest piece of shit ever."
Loser.
But all of that changed on the day in which the climactic Philadelphia Eagles mascot fight scene was filmed. Julio recalls that over 300 extras were brought in to fill the seats in the background. And when Jim Carrey walked onto the set, the whole place went crazy the second they laid eyes on him. At that point, he thought to himself, so people know this guy. He's so over the top that it could work. Ace would hold its Hollywood premiere about a week and a half before its theatrical debut, at which point David Alan Grier was told that he would be sitting right next to Jim during the screening. David, knowing that his buddy was filled with anxiety over the thought of this movie just crashing and burning in front of an audience, genuinely laughed out loud at the movie until his throat was sore. But deep down, he thought that absolutely no one was going to see it.
I see Chris Rock in the lobby. Chris goes, "David, no one will see this movie." Okay? Forget it. Right over my head. I was wrong.
Well, it turns out that everyone who could possibly be enticed by a poster with a guy wearing a Hawaiian shirt, donning a haircut reminiscent of a DQ swirly cone, went and saw the movie, because Ace Ventura managed to take the top spot on its opening weekend, even knocking Robin Williams, the improv king, out of the top spot with Mrs. Doubtfire.
I do a great impression of a hot dog.
And the movie continued to just absolutely dominate for the next 2 months, eventually bringing in a total of $107 million worldwide. In the span of one weekend, Jim Carrey went from that hilarious white guy on In Living Color to Hollywood's newest comedy goldmine. With that series, Jim was provided with, as Marlon Wayans put it, a playground to just let loose and show the world what he was capable of. And after 5 seasons, with only one episode ever dipping below a 10 million viewer rating, Jim had amassed an audience of fans that were just absolutely fiending for a movie that took advantage of his comedic style.
The #1 film in America is Ace Ventura.
Yes, yes, yes!
It's hilarious, outrageous, a perfect comedy.
And even though Ace Ventura definitely provided Jim with a stage that introduced his over-the-top comedic style to a bigger audience, his next movie all but guaranteed that he would become a household name.
The Mask is the best action comedy of the summer. Okay, it's amazing. Jim Carrey is hilarious. Somebody stop me! The Mask is pure movie magic. Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, advanced preview Thursday.
Much like Ace Ventura, The Mask is a character that you just can't imagine anyone else playing. But once again, Jim Carrey wasn't even close to the first person considered for this role. Debuting in a 1987 issue of Dark Horse Presents with a differently spelled name, the Mask character was eventually reshaped and fleshed out in a 1989 series called Mayhem. Mayhem focused on a nerdy pushover named Stanley Ipkiss, who purchases a rare mask for his girlfriend at an antique shop that he quickly discovers grants the wearer with powers of invulnerability.
Look, Ma! I'm roadkill!
Shape-shifting, and the ability to pull random objects out of thin air. And of course, the wearer's personality is amplified and their character traits are exaggerated to the energy level of a cartoon character.
Hi!
That same year, Dark Horse Comics shopped the Mayhem version of The Mask around to various Hollywood studios. Several studios showed interest in adapting the series, but New Line Cinema was the only one that gave Dark Horse a guarantee that the movie would actually get made. And with a title like Mayhem, it should come as no surprise that this series' depiction of The Mask was just absolutely brutal in tone. But that worked out because New Line was essentially the Freddy Krueger studio at that point in time. So The Mask would be right at home there, and the studio kind of saw this character as the next Freddy. With that in mind, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 director Jack Shoulder was initially hired to direct the film. At that point, the studio was dead set on keeping the movie violent and R-rated, but unsure if the movie should be 100% faithful or not at all faithful to the story of the comic. At some point, Jack Shoulder stepped away from the project, so naturally, New Line jumped ahead one Elm Street movie by enlisting Dream Warriors director Chuck Russell to take his place. Shortly after he accepted the job, Chuck went to see a show at the Comedy Store, at which point he was introduced to a young comedian by the name of Jim Carrey.
These days, women have heard every line there is to say. Guys, you gotta get in there with something visual and distract them. Hey, baby! Come here for a second.
Chuck recalls that he was almost unable to believe his eyes at what Jim could do with physical comedy. He then checked out In Living Color, and Chuck was so blown away that he essentially decided to scrap the ultra-violent tone of the comic and make The Mask into more of an edgy PG-13 comedy that was specifically written with Jim Carrey in mind.
Very early on in the process, Chuck told me to write this film for someone named Jim Carrey, and I remember quite distinctly saying, "Who?"
With less violence and a comedic twist established, an entirely new screenplay was written, and although Chuck was dead set on casting Jim Carrey in the lead role, he had his own list of backup actors that were a bit more well-known, including Nicolas Cage, and Jim's future The Cable Guy co-star Matthew Broderick. Meanwhile, the studio was considering some safer choices in Robin Williams, Martin Short, and once again, Rick Moranis. But Jim was brought in to meet Chuck Russell and take a look at the script, and his first reaction was to say,
"It's like it's written for me." And I said, "It is."
Jim was fully on board, but the studio saw him as a bit of a risk, because Ace Ventura had yet to come out, and they weren't sure if plastering his face on the poster would be enough of a draw to make this movie profitable, much less the massive success they were looking for. But one of the producers at New Line, Michael DeLuca, sent a tape of Jim over to Dark Horse Comics founder Mike Richardson to get his approval. That tape contained the sketch My Left Foot of Fury from In Living Color.
Van Damme, nunchucks! Anybody else want some?
After watching that segment and seeing Jim's crazy contortionist abilities, Mike Richardson called the studio and said, "That's The Mask." With his approval and Chuck Russell's assurance that Jim could handle the role, filming officially began in August of 1993. Aside from reducing the amount of violence shown throughout The Mask compared to the comic books, the plot was also slightly changed. Jim's version of Stanley is sort of a hopeless romantic type who gets walked all over by any woman he tries to involve himself with.
Stanley, you are the nicest guy. Really, you are.
Yeah.
and stutters and fumbles like a goober in front of women like Tina Carlisle, played by Cameron Diaz.
Now, how about that account? We have several different plans.
And I mean, come on, can you blame him?
Oh, I like that. Yeah, me too.
Two actresses were originally considered to play Tina Carlisle, being Vanessa Williams along with Anna Nicole Smith.
One's called The Mask by Chuck Russell, and one is Naked Gun 3. It's got Jim Carrey in it, that funny guy.
And she loved the script, but the studio lowballed her on the salary, so her agent convinced her to turn it down, and she did the third Naked Gun movie instead.
The thing is, they offered me, this is embarrassing, $50,000.
At that point in time, Cameron Diaz was simply known as a model. She had no acting experience whatsoever. But when Chuck Russell saw her do a read of the script alongside Jim, it was clear that they had a really solid chemistry.
I guess I'll get going.
Let me stand away. Just stay for a second.
Seeing as both leads were hired on the cheap, with Jim earning $425,000 and Cameron Diaz, I'm guessing, getting paid the same amount that Anna Nicole Smith was offered, most of the film's $20 million budget went towards visual effects. The film did utilize a lot of great special effects for the time, which required Jim to sit in a makeup chair for over 4 hours each day, but George Lucas's company Industrial Light and Magic was hired to do the visual effects work, which was supplemented by Jim's ability to contort his body and do insane facial expressions like a quote, plastic man, which apparently saved New Line thousands of dollars.
And that blend is, I think, a big part of what makes the visuals in The Mask successful.
And even though a lot of the violence was removed when adapting the comic into a PG-13 movie, the creatives smartly chose to leave in a lot of material from those original panels. The balloon animal Tommy gun, the outfits, the auto parts being stuffed into various orifices. However, the movie pulled most of its inspiration from Tex Avery cartoons of the 1940s, an influence they didn't try to hide throughout the film. But one of the biggest changes between the comic book and the movie is the origin of the mask. On the page, the mask came from an unknown tribe in Africa that, through some kind of ritual, infused it with mystical powers. Whereas the movie changed the lore completely, linking the mask to the trickster Norse god Loki.
Loki? The Norse god of mischief.
Whose spirit was either banished into the mask, or he created it with the intention of sowing chaos among humanity. There's actually a deleted opening scene that hammered this lore home a bit further, but it was later cut because test audiences were visibly bored watching it. So all that was scrapped, and essentially all of the marketing was built around Jim Carrey and his insane antics as the Mask. And when New Line went to market the movie right before its release at the tail end of July 1994, the studio's gamble on Jim Carrey paid off in spades.
My first guest stars in the #1 selling video, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and also the star of the #1 movie in the entire world at this very moment, The Mask. Please welcome Jim Carrey!
Suddenly they had a movie where the guy from Ace Ventura was wearing a vibrant yellow suit, green makeup, and massive chiclet teeth, yelling and screaming like a madman. The combination was just too insane to ignore, and the movie exploded into theaters around the world, raking in $351 million for New Line, setting an all-time highest earnings record for the studio that wouldn't be topped until 2001, with The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. As for Dark Horse Comics, the 1-2 punch of The Mask and Time Cop in 1994 suddenly transformed this tiny publisher into an entertainment powerhouse, with several of their other works eventually being adapted to the big screen. And luckily enough, it turns out that New Line was set to distribute Jim's third and final movie of the year. An extremely dumb film that also managed to forever alter the pay scale for Hollywood actors.
Easily the funniest movie of the year.
Yeah!
Dumb and Dumber made me laugh so loudly, I embarrassed myself.
You realize what you've done?
Be prepared to laugh yourself silly. Obnoxiously triumphant.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Huh?
Finally, a movie that lives up to its name. Dumb and Dumber.
Check, please.
Rated PG-13. Now playing.
When it was first conceptualized, Dumb and Dumber wasn't called Dumb and Dumber, and if you can believe it, Jim Carrey wasn't...
Yeah, we know, dude. Jim Carrey wasn't the first person considered to play the role of Lloyd Christmas. Get to the point already. God!
Right, so Dumb and Dumber was one of many projects thought up by the late great John Hughes that never materialized into anything more than an idea. John knew that the movie would be about two dumb guys in Aspen, and it would be called Ski Nuts. Aside from that, he had a couple of gags written for the characters, but no story of any kind.
It was two guys at a ski resort. I remember one of them jumped in the pool and it was frozen. There was no plot.
However, with his track record of hit movies, John pretty much had Hollywood by the balls. So Universal already committed to Ski Nuts and bought the rights to the movie in the event that it actually ended up getting made. But John was stumped for ideas. He needed some writers to help flesh out the story. This is where two fresh-faced writers from the small, often forgotten state of Rhode Island stepped in, Bobby and Peter Farrelly. And yes, even though I personally called them the Farrelly brothers for years, that is how you pronounce their last name.
Hi, I'm Pete Farrelly.
Between the two of them, Bobby and Peter had a shared writing credit on one episode of Seinfeld, which Peter later revealed was sort of accidentally stolen from them after they pitched the idea to the show's creatives.
I get a phone call, they said, hey, but the Seinfeld guys called, they forgot that they shot your show, and they forgot to call you. And they just shot it, and then all of a sudden they were like, hey, those guys pitched us that idea.
Oh my God.
But other than that, Peter had a TV movie and a Paul Reiser comedy special under his belt. Off of the success of that Paul Reiser special, the Farrelly brothers and their writing partner Bennett Yellen were hired by Universal Pictures to write up a sequel to Dragnet starring Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks. While he was stumped for ideas on Ski Nuts, the draft screenplay for Dragnet 2 happened to land on John's desk, and he recognized that Bennett and the Farrellys had a gift for comedy, so he approached them to contribute to his script. When they pitched their idea for the first act of the movie, John Hughes reportedly laughed so hard that he fell out of his chair, and by the end of their meeting, he said,
"That's hilarious. I love it. Go and write it, and if I like it, I'll let you direct it."
Over the next 3 weeks, the guys proceeded to write the first draft of the film's screenplay. But when they went to turn it in, Universal wouldn't return their calls. And shortly after that, John Hughes stepped away from his deal with the studio. So the movie was pretty much left to rot in development hell for several years.
Just sort of disappeared because John left and went to Fox to do Home Alone.
Eventually, the Farrelly brothers got impatient and wrote John Hughes asking if he could wrestle the film rights back from Universal. Luckily, he got the rights back. But because the Farrelly brothers were unproven at that point in time, John told them not to use his name anywhere in the movie or on the promotional materials. Because if they did, they'd have to pay him $1 million for the recognition his name provided.
We are on a very tight budget.
Having produced the aforementioned Paul Reiser special, producer Charles B. Wessler was one of the first people to read the Dumb and Dumber screenplay, and he was so impressed by it that he just had to help get this movie off the ground. Charles recalls that nearly every studio in Hollywood turned the movie down, twisting the knife even further by calling it a total piece of shit. They got so desperate that they ended up sending the script around 2 more times under the name Go West and A Power Tool Is Not a Toy.
When we called it that, everybody started reading it.
While he was struggling to get the movie going, producer Charles B. Wessler came into contact with Brad Kervoy, co-founder of a production company called Motion Picture Corporation of America, MPCA for short. MPCA was a studio that, at this point in time at least, proudly specialized in producing low-budget films. We're talking Purple People Eater, Pumpkinhead 2 Blood Wings, and a number of schlocky action movies starring the Paul brothers. The ones with dope-ass mullets, by the way, not these two clowns. Brad recalls that as he was reading the Dumb and Dumber script, he laughed so hard he nearly soiled himself. So he brought the script back to his business partner, Steve Stabler, and they immediately agreed to finance the movie on a budget of $2 million. Unfortunately, it turned out that a movie planned for theaters, written by 3 guys who had never done anything for the big screen, directed by a guy who had never directed anything, made on a relatively low budget, just wasn't that enticing to any of Hollywood's most in-demand comedic actors. Or even actors with low demand, for that matter.
The guy who was doing the Burger King commercials at the time had already passed. My brother came in, he said, we just hit rock bottom.
It's been estimated that over 100 actors were considered for the role of Lloyd Christmas during that time. Some of them turning it down, but others just never had a chance to look at the script because their agent saw the title Dumb and Dumber and just threw it in the trash.
Back then, agents would say, I'm not going to give this to my client, they'll fire me. Dumb and Dumber, you think they want to be in a thing called Dumb and Dumber? No, they don't.
But the script made its way to Jim Carrey while he was filming The Mask, and after reading through it, he was 100% on board to play the part of Lloyd. Jim's enthusiasm over Dumb and Dumber, combined with the performances he was giving every day on the Mask set, caused New Line to reconsider the project after previously turning it down. MPCA would continue to produce the movie, but New Line was going to provide an additional $1 million for the budget, while also taking care of distribution. That is, until a bomb dropped on Hollywood in the form of an enthusiastic Hawaiian shirt-wearing pet detective.
Thank you for all your cooperation.
After Ace Ventura opened at number 1, New Line offered Jim Carrey an upfront salary of $250,000 for Dumb and Dumber, but his agent hit back at them demanding $350,000. Instead of striking while the iron was hot, New Line dragged their feet over and over again as Ace continued to blow up the box office. By the time negotiations came to an end, New Line would end up paying Jim $7 million for Dumb and Dumber, which also set a new record for a comedic actor's salary in Hollywood. But the struggles didn't end there, because New Line, after begrudgingly throwing all that money Jim's way, were 100% against casting Jeff Daniels for the role of Harry Dunn. Even Jeff's management told him not to do it, as they believed this movie would end his career.
We're going, this will ruin your career. We cannot recommend more strongly that you do not do this movie.
However, the studio was insistent on casting another comedian for the part. In fact, they really wanted Harry to be played by Harlan Williams, a good friend of Jim Carrey's who previously opened for him on stand-up comedy tours.
In the end, it was down to me and Jeff.
But all of the creatives on the movie and Jim Carrey really wanted Jeff Daniels to play Harry. In their minds, having two, for lack of a better term, comedic go-hards trying to constantly one-up each other in the humor department would have just hurt the movie. So New Line sort of half-heartedly threw Jeff an offer of $50,000 for the role.
I think they offered him 50 grand. And they figured he'd just say, F you, I'm not doing 50. He's getting 7, I'm doing 50 grand. But he said, yeah, okay, I'll take it.
With casting out of the way, Dumb and Dumber officially began filming at the tail end of April 1994, about 8.5 months before its theatrical release. When he got to set, Jim showed up with a hilarious bowl cut inspired by the hairdo he had as a young boy, and he had the cap removed from his chipped front tooth. Two features that were not at all written in the script. And for someone like Jim Carrey who really prefers to go off script and just completely let loose, working with the Farrelly brothers was a dream come true. They encouraged their actors to read their lines from the page word for word, but when they got what they needed, they would say,
guys, go crazy, do whatever you want. We got it, and we know we got it in the can. Why don't you guys go ahead and do whatever the hell you want?
And that approach definitely bettered the film. Because if you look at the script, a lot of the most iconic lines and moments weren't nearly the same on the page. For example, Lloyd pointing his breath spray in the wrong direction, his hilarious backhanded compliment towards senior citizens.
Senior citizens, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, can still serve a purpose.
And last but definitely not least, Lloyd's excitement over the moon landing about 25 years too late. But that much improvisation left Bobby and Peter Farrelly with a ton of extra material to work with. And with a comedy movie, you want to keep the runtime anywhere between 90 and 100 minutes, because even the funniest material can wear thin after a while. Well, they didn't get the memo on that, as it turns out that the very first rough cut of Dumb and Dumber was nearly 4 hours long.
The first screening we ever did was 3 hours and 40 minutes.
Oh,
That's the God's honest truth. We just got together 50 of our best friends and we said, hey, tell us what's good and what's not good. When it ended, we were standing at the door, my brother and I, and the first friend came out, Timmy Sheehan. My brother said, what'd you think? He said, the truth? He says, yeah. He goes, worst movie I've ever seen in my life. He goes, seriously? He says, I am serious. Bobby's like, fuck you, get the fuck out of here.
While the Farrelly brothers got to work chopping the movie down with veteran editor Christopher Greenberry, The Mask hit theaters and, as you know, just blew away the earnings that Ace Ventura had achieved earlier that year. New Line smartly decided to run a teaser trailer for Dumb and Dumber before showings of The Mask.
And I would go to movie theaters to watch the trailer before The Mask started and watch the audience, and they would respond so strongly. And I remember thinking in my naive way when I watched the audience react to that trailer, I think it's going to be a hit.
With a built-in audience from its two previous films, when everything was said and done, Dumb and Dumber, which after salary negotiations and inflated production budgets cost about $17 million to produce, ended up making $246 million worldwide. Also landing in the top 50 highest earning movies list for both 1994 and 1995. And with that, much like John Hughes, Jim Carrey had Hollywood by its balls.
On behalf of virtually the entire Hollywood community, we wish we were up top where you are and you were down here in the gutter where we are.
Well, there's no room for me down there. There's just too many of you guys.
In 1995, Jim Carrey was nominated for over 17 awards, ranging from the highest honor of a Golden Globe nomination for The Mask.
The nominees for Best Performance by an Actor in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy are Jim Carrey, The Mask.
To the most lowly of awards with a nomination for Worst New Star at the Golden Raspberry Awards, which ironically enough he lost to Anna Nicole Smith for her performance in The Naked Gun. But at this point, Hollywood realized that they would be leaving money on the table if they didn't take advantage of Jim Carrey's rising star by just milking every last dollar out of his new stable of characters. Cartoon adaptations of The Mask and Ace Ventura premiered on CBS in August and December of 1995 respectively. Meanwhile, Dumb and Dumber, the animated series, landed on ABC in October of that year. At this point, Jim hit the big time and was too busy getting fitted for his Riddler suit to step into a recording booth. So 3 different voice actors were hired to do their best imitation of him for these shows.
You know,
I really meant to turn left at the Groundhog family's hutch.
I think you're right. Look, over the underpass. That was not the end of the story.
But Jim Carrey's career explosion also happened to coincide with the rise of entertainment tabloids and celebrity gossip TV shows, and they ended up impacting his personal life in a huge way. While filming Dumb and Dumber in mid-1994, Jim began dating actress Lauren Hawley, who played the character of Mary Swanson.
Samsonite. I was way off.
However, they briefly met early on in 1993 when Lauren auditioned for the part of Melissa Robinson in Ace Ventura, and that's where she first caught Jim's eye.
Tractor beam. Sucked me right in.
When he was promoting The Mask in July of 1994, Jim was interviewed by Howard Stern, who unsurprisingly tried to dig up dirt on his newly formed relationship with Lauren and his ongoing separation with his first wife, Melissa Womer. Jim was clearly uncomfortable, trying his best to move on to another topic, but Howard's wording sort of framed the situation as he dumped his wife for a Hollywood actress.
And then you dumped your wife. Who's that piece of ass you're dating now? What's her name again?
And the tabloids ran with that narrative for the length of their relationship. But the truth of the matter was, Jim Carrey's first marriage had its ups and downs throughout the years, and once he stepped onto the Ace Ventura set where he was suddenly viewed as a big movie star, everything came crashing down because Melissa claimed that he didn't want to return to the day-to-day domesticity that he had been used to.
I think it was something about taking out the trash that ended the marriage.
You don't ask a big star to take out the trash. You couldn't believe.
Apparently, it kept him from locking himself into the headspace he needed to be in to play his characters.
Yeah. What I'm reading is that Jim says his wife was drawing him out of his
character,
milieu, if you will.
Right.
He has to be into his character.
And I mean, anyone who saw the Netflix documentary Jim and Andy knows just how into his characters Jim got at times. In character as Andy Kaufman, the dude literally goaded Jerry Lawler on so much that he tried to beat the shit out of him.
I'll let joke goes too far. Hey, anytime I want to, I can do this to you. Okay.
Lauren and Jim dated for about 2.5 years before getting married, but ended up separating about 9 months later in June of 1997 over irreconcilable differences. Lauren later revealed that their personal lives were essentially swallowed up by a constant barrage of paparazzi and tabloid news journalists who relentlessly followed their every move.
They would do things like scale the fence at our house and live in our backyard and take pictures through our window, or go through our garbage and put in the magazine what was in our garbage.
As for the legacy of Jim's 3 box office smashes from 1994, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective was quickly followed up by Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, making even more money than the first movie, which is good for the studio because Jim's salary was upped to the $10 to $15 million range, quickly being topped by an industry-shaking $20 million payday for 1997's The Cable Guy. When Nature Calls was viewed by fans as either way worse than the original or way better than the original. It seems like there was no in-between. But Jim seems to have focused on reviews from critics who just absolutely tore the movie down. Because after that, he avoided doing sequels of any kind for nearly 20 years, breaking the streak when he returned as Lloyd Christmas in 2014's Dumb and Dumber 2.
I like it a lot.
But by that point, the magic of the first movie was just gone. Jim clearly agrees because, as he stated in 2022, most of the time when you make something that really hits with people, the sequels have a diminishing return. If you do it long enough after the fact, you're kind of imitating yourself now. You're not using your original inspiration.
Relax, I took care of it.
However, he might just go back on those words because Jim has expressed interest in doing Ace Ventura 3. And Cameron Diaz has stated that she would do a proper sequel to The Mask, but only if Jim is on board for it. We already got a sequel to The Mask, but there was nothing proper about it. What a stinking pile of shit that was.
Can you say dad?
Mother.
But sequels, no matter how good or bad they are, will never take away the magic of these 3 movies. For me personally, Ace, while highly enjoyable, is my least favorite of the 3, followed by The Mask, with Dumb and Dumber undoubtedly taking the top spot. I grew up about 45 minutes away from Providence, so I always appreciated the film's Rhode Island origins. Driving past the big blue bug from the beginning of Harry and Lloyd's road trip still puts a smile on my face to this very day. But if you're a fan of this movie, please do yourself a favor and visit the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. This was the filming location for the swanky Aspen Hotel, and it was just so surreal being able to see the stairs that Jim Carrey strutted down in his winter cowboy outfit. But the hotel also inspired Stephen King's The Shining, so it's weirdly comforting and unsettling at the same time. Looking back on it now, no matter your feelings on these 3 films, this was just an insane run that I don't think will ever be replicated again. Fox did try to capture lightning in a bottle twice by setting John Leguizamo up for a similar run, giving him a replacement show for In Living Color called House of Buggin', which led right into a New Line produced film adaptation of the comic book Spawn, and an Ace Ventura adjacent movie known as The Pest. And that one, didn't have quite the same cultural impact. But it's okay because John Leguizamo is the man, and I hate to admit it, but I laugh my ass off every time I watch the intro to that stupid fucking movie. And that'll do it for this overly long episode about 3 movies that are now 30 plus years old. Good lord, I cannot believe it's been that long. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a comment down below and let me know which of these movies is your favorite. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.